Stay tuned to the end of this video to a word for our patrons. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. Happy holidays, everybody. For Fatemas this year, I bring you a Wanted, because Albert is making me work on Christmas. That's right, we are literally recording this part on Christmas Day. Got the news Christmas Eve, doing the video today. But we have a permanent SSR Avenger added to the game, several weeks early, mind you. And so, this is the show Wanted. We're going to hit you up with the history and folklore of a character, their lore and fate, their mechanics, and more. Nitocris Altar, everybody. And I hope you enjoy this video, despite the fact that it is a tiny bit rushed. Also, by the way, Nitocris Altar, our first permanent adventure. Alrighty, to talk about Nitocris, which can also be written as Nitocris with a K, because our best sources are Greek, we have to talk about some history nerds, but like, ancient history nerds, as in they're from ancient history. I've also seen the name written Nitocret, instead of a ris and a ret sound. But writing about Egyptian names can be tricky because of vowels. Anyway, our story begins with Herodotus, the father of history. He has a long and storied career I have to grossly oversimplify. But he was a historian from Halicarnassus. He wrote a work literally titled Histories, Historiae, circa 1430 BCE, which is a major source of a lot of knowledge around the region of the Mediterranean. Herodotus drew criticism both then and now, but some of his sources were verifiably accurate about some things. To compress down a lot of scholarly debate, the general tone of histories, I think, is that Herodotus basically wrote down stories as he heard them, either as he picked them up from previous sources, or because locals told them to him. So this means that he did write down a fair share of urban legends, common knowledge, and included a decent amount of mythologizing. But who doesn't exaggerate what they're writing down when they're talking about history? But do know that some people, even in ancient history, called him the father of lies instead of father of history. Our other big nerd is Manetho, an Egyptian priest from the early Ptolemaic years, either working under Ptolemy I Soter or Ptolemy II Philadelphus. He wrote something called the Egyptica, the history of Egypt, somewhere between 323 and 246 BCE, probably. Again, we don't know exactly which Ptolemy he was supposed to be working for, so the dates are unclear, but he compiled lists of ancient pharaohs and other rulers of Egypt as far back as he could, and did his best to divide them into dynasties based on genealogy and location. Manetho did the best he could with King's List we already had, and probably even moved past some political omissions that previous pharaohs did to actually include a decently comprehensive record. But his list of, the first dynasty does begin with mythological founders of Egypt, syncretized with Greek deities, because, well, he was Egyptian. He wrote a lot of this down in Greek. Anyway, that means that Manetho is not necessarily working literally. His name, by the way, could also be written Manethon or another half-dozen Greek spellings, and we don't know exactly what his Egyptian name was, but he was an Egyptian priest. It's just he was working for the Ptolemies, so of course they gave him a Greek name. Now, according to these two sources, who were known for embellishment, were also historically considered well-read and reliable, does we put Nitocris? I read that slightly wrong from my script, but I'm going to keep it in. Well, the version from Histories should be pretty familiar to anybody rocking with FGO. Nitocris is a queen of Egypt. Her brother was the pharaoh. He was killed by his subjects, and she ascended to rulership, but she was filled with such
a lust for revenge? Oh!
Yeah, that. Thank you, Skullface. Anyway, as a result for this, she constructed an underground chamber, invited all the conspirators to a feast, and then while they were eating, flooded it with the waters of the Nile. Then, according to Herodotus, she may have committed suicide. From Manetho's version, the name Nitocris doesn't really appear literally as that anywhere in the Egyptian King's List. There is a royal name fragment which resembles Nikreti, with a Q sound, in the English transliteration. It appeared in some king lists that Manetho may have been working from. So best guesses, based on later information, gonna spoil it a little, this was probably an error transposing a later name, but Manetho ran with it and did officially rank Nitocris as a pharaoh, ruling in the final slot of the 6th dynasty, which was from 2345 to 2181 BCE, And this is why fact-checking this is very hard. This info was already 2,000 years old when Manetho and Herodotus were writing down it. Egypt was old, y'all. Now, according to fun Manetho notes, Nitocris was the daughter of Pepi II Neferkare, and one of his queen consorts, Neith, presumably named after the goddess. Pepi II, Pepi II, by the way, allegedly ruled as pharaoh for 94 years, or maybe 64 years, since he was about the age of 6. He was succeeded by his son, Merenre Nietmesaf, probably missing some vowels in there, the second. Yeah, that's right, we decided to use that name twice. Who only ruled for about a year and a month. This would make the alleged Nitocris his full sister, but that's not really that weird by ancient Egyptian marriage standards, where Ra/Horus/Amun was secretly your dad the whole time when you became pharaoh. Manetho lists Nitocris after her brother, claims she was brave, beautiful, wise, all that stuff. But he also misattributed the third pyramid of Giza, the one of Menkaure, not to be confused with Menkaure, which was built earlier during the 4th dynasty, so... Now, according to the Abydos King list, a very respectable list of guys, we jump straight to Negerikare of the 8th dynasty, a name which can be roughly syncretized with Netiquerti on the Turin King list, which, not to confuse you, is a king list which is currently held in Turin, but it's probably from the era of Ramses II. I don't know why Turin gets to call dibs on this king's list. But King's List, like the Turin King's List, sometimes called the Turin Canon, is where we get the Nitocris error from. So while there is some quibbling over spelling, this real guy, Netiquerti, or Negerikare, was probably the one who took after over Merenre. Negerikare Sipta is a masculine name, by the way, leading to a probable lack that he is truly the same person as Nitocris. So it's not like secretly there was a lady pharaoh with a different name. Assumably, the name would have stayed feminine and just, this is a different guy. Now, that said, we do have some funny bits of history here. First of all, the Abydos King list is not foolproof. The Amarna period pharaohs, including our boy Tutankhamun, are excluded, presumably for being associated with heretical stuff. Severally presumed foreign pharaohs are excluded, and so are 2 pharaohs who we know for a fact were actually women, Sobeknefru and Hatshepsut. Again, all of these were probably for political reasons. The Abydos King list was basically a giant tablet of all the quote-unquote ancestors you wanted honored as pharaoh. There are some other exclusions as well. And the second thing is that, according to Manetho's Egyptica, his follow-up period of the 7th dynasty is often regarded by modern scholars as either outright fictitious or likely, again, exaggerated. He uses the old 70 kings in 70 days metaphor, which obviously didn't actually happen, but does mean that some of the names he rips off here are probably not real, and then the whole business with the 7th and 8th dynasty gets chaotic. Literally, you will have some scholars cut out everything that Manetho said about the 7th and just move the 8th up to that slot, because roughly contiguous with the 8th is where kings lists like Abydos start. It's crazy, I know. Now, this whole confusion is probably because the 6th dynasty ends the period of the Old Kingdom, and the 7th or 8th is from the first intermediate period. Yes, there's multiple intermediate periods in ancient Egyptian history. It's pretty crazy. There's a couple possible reasons why there may have been this chaotic gap, but the shortest version is that for some reason, pharaonic power at the capital city of Memphis was broken and a non-royal noble class emerged because the provincial governors, nomarchs, were given hereditary titles, so their children would take their title as governor and so on. This created, a separate class system and competing barons basically and governors, so it's likely to lead to a confusion of the pharaonic power. Now, to summarize our end result, after all that topsy-turvy bullshit, we have a very likely smudged or otherwise misappropriated name of Nitocris, who is either the last of the 6th or the first of the 8th, which may also just be the 7th, because this all happened during a very chaotic period in Egyptian history. Sources for Herodotus and Manetho's specific story about Nitocris? As far as I can tell, none. Herodotus is well known for not citing his sources other than maybe a guy in Egypt told me. And I also do not know where Manetho got his particular history. If he was working from a papyri or stelae or some other item, he didn't say which one it was, and we haven't found one with this story, so... However, we do know that the Abydos king list is not perfect, and did in fact cut some female rulers, and other pharaohs listed by Herodotus and Manetho which are not on these lists have been proven to be real. We have just enough ambiguity to say that there could have been somebody kind of like Nitocris. Now, where does the name Nitocris actually come from? Well, way later in the 26th dynasty, We have a couple of records of some Nitocris's, or in Egyptian, probably looking something more like Nitikret, again with a QR. These are related to the position of the god's wife of Amun and divine adoratrice of Amun. Great name, by the way. These were high-ranking positions of the cult of Amun in Thebes during the time. This was right at the end of the Third Intermediate Period, letting you know once again how chaotic Egypt was. But Manetho would have known this name because the actual high priestess, Nitikret, was daughter of a pharaoh who Manetho wrote about, so, he would probably have seen some of his historical records. And her name is written similarly to the Nitikreti, ending on an I vowel, probably, again, spelling. So, again, the theory here is just he knows about a proper noun name resembling Nitocris way later. He sees a very similar name in a King's List papyrus that has been reassembled or damaged or transcribed improperly, and is just like, got it. Herodotus also attributes the name Nitocris to a ruler from Babylon. Have Semiramis and Nito ever spoken to each other in game? Anyway, this ambiguity but also fame does mean that Nitocris is well attested in fiction. There's several fictionalized story of the Herodotus tale coming into popularity around the mummy boom in the early 1900s and on into the pulp era. Check out OSP's very excellent video on the history of mummies. Nitocris does get a passing mention by H.P. Lovecraft, a queen of ghouls and other dark things. He probably got her name from a Lord Dunsany play, one of the aforementioned adaptations of the Herodotus text, which first ran in 1916. In the 70s, Brian Lumley ran with this in his story, titled The Mirror of Nitocris. This directly plugs her into Nyarlathotep cults, previously only vaguely suggested by Lovecraft, though I would also say a little contradictory because she's heavily associated with ghouls, mummies, and other necromancies. But Lumley gives her possession of the titular mirror, which can be used to see through time and space and summon old gods to bargain with for eldritch powers. This bit is important because the mirror, with that name, also comes up in Demon Bane, a Cthulhu Mythos / mecha visual novel from 2003. While Demon Bane's not as influential as Fate, obviously, I do think we can say it is probably a cult classic. And having come out before FGO, being in similar circles, presumably the FGO writers and some of the FGO fans would know about it. Nitocris, usually spelled the K-way, is also a recurring character in Call of Cthulhu role-playing game stuff as a result. Also, bonus fun fact, the name Nitocris was also an alternative name for a genus of moth known as Protozoa, with an EU and an XOA, which mostly seem to be from Australia. No idea why. I think it was a French taxonomist who picked the name, but it's an alternate name that's no longer in use. Let's go to lore. Now, all of that HBL stuff was relevant, I swear, because we're moving into the Fate lore. Fate constructs some additional text onto Nitocris' context, claiming she's a user of Magecraft, hence Castra's original class, but basically follows the same story logic that Herodotus gave. The Sixth Dynasty was a chaotic time, local nobles were on the rise, Nitocris' brother was killed, she was placed on the throne as a puppet ruler, but she turned on them and killed them before committing suicide herself. But without constructing mortuary temples, undergoing mummification, any of that stuff, no plans to preserve her body after death, which would be used to naturally explain why history seems to have misplaced her. Her original caster NP, Anpuneb Ta Jesser, which I think means Mirror of Anubis in a really roundabout way, it uses one of his epithets, is of an unknown origin, but doesn't work like a literal mirror. It reflects a dark, dangerous world. Her profiles say that it could be the Egyptian underworld, which obviously can be quite dangerous if you don't have the appropriate spells to cover your ass. But it also might just be a projection of Nitocris' mind or mental state. Remember, she did ice an unknown number of guys by dumping the Nile on them. But functionally, it works a lot like the mirror that is referenced in, I would say, Brian Lumley, but obviously the people writing FGO would mean from Demon Bane. Now, whether it's a genuine underworld terminal, remember how powerful underworld deities like Ereshkigal are, a prison for the outer gods made by the Egyptian deities, or just the maximum power of Nitocris' magecraft, her personal mental state and opinions made real, they're all floated. None is really given a confirmed source, but it is a fun little nod there. Original flavor Nitocris is said to be both the child and incarnation of Horus, who is referred to in the text as a sky god, a god of the sun and the moon. But he also has some other very important roles to the pharaoh, depending on which exact area you're in. Again, remember, Nitocris' entire deal, if it happened at all, if anything resembling it happened, was about 2,000 years before Manetho, possibly working for the first Ptolemaic pharaoh, wrote it all down. There was as much gap between him and her as there is between him and us. So a lot of these beliefs drifted over time. Anyway, in the early dynastic years, the pharaoh was supposed to be descended directly from the god Horus, though technically by the time of the Old Kingdom where Nitocris is from, this version would have fallen out of favor for different divine lineages for the pharaoh, but still it is important to keep track of. In both her caster and her swimsuit assassin form, Nitocris shows off some looks from the Medjed, sometimes also could be transcribed as Mechet, a very minor deity mentioned in some versions of the Book of the Dead. Their name is supposed to mean something like Smiter. They are an unseen being, despite the fact that they have ability to kill with their eyes. I think the literal translation of the text is something like, who goes unseen even though he can smite with his eyes or something. Other than that, don't know shit about him. No other major depictions other than in a couple of funerary papyri. But some of these papyri were shown in Japanese museums in around 2012, so Medjed became a minor meme over there if you haven't heard that story. That's why, presumably, you have Medjed in Persona 5, and also, obviously, you have Nitocris with some very memey Medjed stuff. Her Summer Variants NP also is relevant because it's much more based on Herodotus' version. It recreates the chamber where she allegedly drowned some guys in the Nile. Also, that's literally an assassination, so it works. Now, as for why Nitocris became altered, well, you're just going to have to read Lost Belt 7 to find out. But in general, I think it's safe to say that this incarnation is much more an aspect of Anubis, Lord of the Necropolis, guardian of the underworld, than of Horus or of Medjed. So she's pretty broad in her divine favors. Now, if somehow you don't know, you haven't picked up on this, Nitocris is pretty popular in Fate, probably in no small part by the fact that her VA, Minami Tanaka, is a longtime Fate fan and one of the hosts of Caldea Radio, but Nitocris is directly involved in Singularity 6, Jerusalem, Camelot, a.k.a., but she also had appearances in classic events like the Dead Heat Summer Race, where her summer is from, and was also in Super Ghouls and Pumpkins, and obviously is now showing up in Lost Belt 7. I'm also going to go out ahead and snake a guess that she's going to come up in Ordeal Call 2, because that's the one that's Avenger-flavored. I'm just assuming we're going to touch on this base again a little. So, not surprising that she got an altar, especially given some of the stuff we're going to talk about with mechanics, but still interesting to see them move this one up a few weeks, almost a month, honestly. But let's jump over to those mechanics. And so, on that mechanical note, Nitocris Altar is an Avenger. She's on the higher HP, lower attack side, though obviously with Avengers that means her attack is still higher than many servants. She's got about 12,000 both ways. She is quick arts, buster. That's right, 1 quick, 3 arts, 1 buster, just like her normal version, but with slightly better hit counts. She's 343. But as a result, she has lower NP gen. It's about 0.37. So you have to keep in mind some other stuff with that. Now, her Noble Phantasm is about what you'd expect from a new Nitocris. It's arts, it's AoE, it deals bonus damage to human attribute servants, and it has a chance to instant kill, which is fairly median, and it has a second, much higher chance to kill instantly evil alignment enemies. Both of these should proc after the hits. Its overcharge effect is just an NP damage ramp for 1 turn first. Pretty normal stuff. Her first skill is a fairly normal steroid with a twist. It's a 20-30% arts and buster, oddly enough, for 3 turns, but is also a 1k to 2k heal per turn. So very solid damage boosting and a little bit of longevity. Now, her second skill is the big one you'd expect from a Nitocris. It's a 50 to 100% battery. It also gives the whole party a 20 to 40% buff success up for 1, makes the whole party the good alignment for 1 turn, but also makes all enemies evil alignment for 1 turn and decreases enemies' buff success by 20% for 1 turn. Very valuable skill, not just obviously because it's a 100% battery, but also it does a lot of interesting stuff in terms of both the buffs and the alignments. Her final skill is a team-wide 10 to 20% arts up for 3 turns, and is also a 60% chance each to give allies who have the good alignment 1-hit 3 turns of evade, debuff immunity, and death immunity. Note that without her own second skill, Nitocris Altar, like most normal Avengers, is chaotic evil, so she doesn't benefit from her own buffs. Keep this in mind. Now, for passives, you have Madness Enhancement E, just a little bit of that buster up. Avenger D++, that's the defensive NP gain one, but also the one that's a demerit. Oblivion Correction A, for free crits. And Self-Replenishment B, which is 3.5 NP per turn, so her lower NP gen also doesn't matter as much. And also Divinity EX for a fairly robust damage plus. Every hit is just going to get 250 damage added on for free. So Nito Altar's role should be fairly apparent here. She's here to clear farming type content, things you're dealing with, waves of enemies, whether that's, there are some story fights which are just waves and waves of dudes, but mostly you're going to be using it for farming free quests or event quests. She has a Arts NP, it's got a trait damage, she's got a big-ass battery, her instant death chance is quite large and can be doubled up. And before she even gets a support, she has plus 50% on Arts for 3. This should massage the fact that compared to other Avengers, her attack is lower, but you can get some serious steroids to get this going. And as I said before, she should apply the instant death after damage, so you will get your normal refund, but you are going to look at some enemies who are just going to be instantly yeeted. For your supporters, obviously we have to mention Castoria. You're doing arts farming, we mention her because obviously her NP generation stats and her extra arts stats are really good. And obviously while you have your own 100% battery, Castoria can massage that, but the fact that Nitocris Alter does have a 100% battery does mean you have a little bit of flexibility. Anything you're going to take a chance which is going to be dragged out, I would recommend Tamamo. Avengers are not known for their HP totals, and so Tamamo's heals, her ability to charge on her NP, and her offensive buffs can add on to Nitocris' own. Plus, some of her cooldowns can be quite long, so the cooldown reduction on the Tamamo NP can be also very useful. Lady Avalon also gives you some sustain options, but Nito doesn't really do a lot with crits on her own besides the one passive, so you may want to look elsewhere for support options. This leaves units like Paracelsus on the budget slot, but also, because Nitocris Alter is chaotic evil, there are some funny teams you can make. Jox has a little bit of evil sync, but Asha Doman has a lot of interactions that are very useful. Doman especially, like I said, he can dish out a plus 100% crit and plus 40% attack up for 3 turns for units who are chaotic and evil. Upcoming Alter Ego Rasputin, aka Kyrie, also has an evil-coded skill which gives 20% battery to the team if they're evil and more arts up. Not a lot, but just something interesting to keep in mind. There are also a lot of NPs which are anti-evil, and a decent number of skills, so her second skill can really give some other people roundabout damage boosts as well, so long as you're timing it correctly. For craft essences, you do got a few choices here, since Nito has her own 100% battery, and you're likely to use supporters who also have big batteries. You can just go whole hog and slap her with a Black Grail or Heaven's Feel or their equivalents. Anything that's going to boost up NP damage or arts up is probably the way you're going to want to go. If you are taking her into story fights, which you may be doing, especially with this upcoming Lost Belt, there's a fair number of these NP damage up CEs which also give Pearson invincibility, ignore invincible. I would also probably recommend those for some stuff just to avoid some troublesome hard defenses, because story bosses will just ignore instant death. Her Bond CE is also a plus 10% arts and instant kill for the whole team while she's on the field. Might be good for some meme strats, but it's probably not going to beat some more focused brews. Like I said, only 10% up to those respective stats. Now, the other stuff category. Which means, first we talk about her Ascension. It's pretty normal. She's an Avenger, so you don't use statues for classes. But since she's permanent, she doesn't use a lot of brand new mats. You're looking at, 10 of a couple of mats each Ascension level. Skills are pretty similar, though she is going to need some mats from LB 5 and 6 in there. Append skills are going to go a little dicier because those are meant to be newer, but they should not be as much of a problem. But this should be a fairly straightforward leveling process. Now, Nitocris Alter is permanent, so after her summon period, and remember, after, you can roll her in any banner which doesn't explicitly exclude permanents. Lucky bags and other functions like that are often limited only. And since she is a permanent female unit, you can expect her to have specific rate ups during Valentine's. Also looks like she's going to have a rate up in the pre-release to Ordeal Call 2, as I said, the Avenger type one. But other than that, doesn't look like there is a lot shaky-breaky going on. Maybe they'll restorify some banners later, but I think this 2-week summon period is just going to run us right to the second half of Lost Belt 7. But that's going to be it. Surprise video, I know. But do keep your eyes peeled for a regularly scheduled Rasputin on New Year's. And we're going to be back with our podcast, Let's Take Fate Grand Order, probably in 2025. I got stuff going on this holiday weekend. But I hope you have had a happy holiday, have a happy new year, all that fun stuff. Make sure to hit us up with a subscribey, a likey, maybe leave a comment down below how you're doing on your rate-ups. Don't put any spoilers in the comments, though. We'll come back to that later. I got a whole big show for you to do, cover that. And, make sure you got your bell rung for notifications, because I bet you weren't expecting this video. You can also check it out on Patreon. Could have gotten this video a little bit early. I'll have more on our lovely patrons as well in a second after our musical outro. But the only other bit of thing to say is, sorry, this is probably going to delay the compilation of Lost Belt 6 talk for a little bit, because I had to work on this instead. Sorry. Rip me. Anyway, that's going to be it. Let's do the outro. And before
before we end the video, let's make sure to thank all our patrons, but especially Adam to Harp, Blackest OG, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, JW9000, Chris Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Liam Kessler, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Robin, Sharwar, Some Guy Named Bob, and Very the Crow. If you like what we do, want to see some more, consider supporting us on Patreon. Ciao.